Thank you. And thank you all for being here. It's quite a crowded room. That's impressive. So, as usual, I've got far too much to say and not enough time to say it. So I'm going to kind of race through the slides because I am quite interested in your questions. And I think in particular, I'd like to hear if some of the common problems that I'm talking about are familiar to you, and also some of the strategies you've used to deal with them. So just to quickly go over what I want to talk about is the sorts of poor outcomes that we mean. What do we even call a poor outcome, and what do we think are the reasons behind outcomes going badly? And I want to translate that to key areas of claims operations, and we've just grouped things into 5 key areas. There's 100 ways you could cut it, trying to put the spotlight on different areas of claims management, and I'm talking about claims management by insurers or third-party providers. And that leads you then to a checklist of things that need to be done well to optimise your outcomes. So if there isn't time to go through the checklist in detail at the end, it's there for you to read. I think the main thing is to understand what is behind some of the problems. So just quickly, Finity Consultants has quite a bit of insight because of for various reasons we've been involved in reviewing claims for all sorts of insurers, a lot of workers' compensation and CTP, including Comcare, specialist and self-insurers, for all sorts of reasons as on the slide. And I guess our insight is that you see the same sorts of scenarios all over the place. And I guess I was involved in some claims work back in the 90s and 2000s, that's that long ago, and the same sort of things you would see then. So they're sort of perennial problems across all sorts of jurisdictions. And I've just put that diagram there because poor claims outcomes often aren't within our control. There's hundreds of external factors that lead to whether an outcome's good or bad, but claims management is there in the middle, and that's what we want to focus on. There's some key areas of claims management that can actually turn cases around. So what sort of poor outcomes do we mean? I guess the typical: delayed return to work, unable to upgrade or sustain a return to work, really long rehab programs that cost a lot and may or may not actually reach their goals, and higher than expected costs. And I've put in there various reasons that we could hypothesise about why those situations develop on some of our claims, a minority of our claims, hopefully. The other side of the coin is, of course, it's a really poor outcome when you have somebody feeling like this in the middle of the system. And I've all seen research that suggests that the system can be very bruising for many claimants. So relationships have not been preserved and relationships have broken down in these poor outcome cases very often. So what can be done? We can often see why things went wrong, or we can hypothesise, but the question is whether claims management could have done something different to turn the case around. And I want to call out here a real recognition that good claims management is really difficult, which sometimes isn't recognised enough, I think. If you're going to make a decision to intervene and try and do something on a particular case to try and turn it around, you've got to have the, this is so dark I can't read it, you've got to have the time, that's the key, you've got to have the will, and expertise and credibility, I think, really is confidence. You've got to have the confidence that you can actually get involved and help and contribute value to the management of the claim. And very importantly, you've got to have the right sort of information. As a claims manager, you have a pivotal role in providing information to the stakeholders that might assist them in the role that they're playing. So what is really needed to reach the optimal outcomes, and does the claims operation actually facilitate that? So we're looking at claims operations. Oh, and now it's not moving forward. So can I? No, that's back. And that's forward. So splitting claims operations, as I said, you could do it 100 ways, but let's look at it in 5 sections with decision-making in the middle. And I'm seeing that decision-making really relies on those other quadrants, on information, on process and systems, and on the culture and the nature of the team that you're working in. So we'll start by, oh, my clicker's not working anymore. But there we go. No, that's backwards. Sorry. We'll start by looking at process and systems, and I'm just going to call out some key aspects of it. Of course, everything to do with the process of claims management is critical, and there's hundreds of specific strategies that you could look at. But in particular, we want to call out triage and segmentation, mainly because we've often seen it really not being very effective. So some claims management operations don't triage and don't segment, but more and more, if there's volume there, they do. But does that segmentation, is it actually based on risk of a poor outcome, on complexity, on the expertise and time that's needed for the case? Sometimes, surprisingly, it's not really. And claims might be identified as high risk, but do they actually go to a team that has more time or more expertise or a lower caseload to help them manage that? Very often, not really. It's more about splitting up the workload into teams than about actually being strategic in a lot of places that we've looked at. We've also seen triage falling down because it fails to pick up emerging risks. So an initial triage is done, but then things don't get reclassified as more information becomes apparent and you realise what looked like a simple claim is not. Aligned with that, I guess, is a reluctance to reallocate claims, which really I've thought is often misguided. Although claimants hate having different case managers and being handed over, if it's being handed over to someone who can give that case more attention and more of the right sort of attention, then it's a positive, not a negative. Sorry, I keep thinking I'm going backwards, sorry. So another thing in process that's really important is that initial assessment and planning. And of course, there's a routine to go through to pull in the information. But again, we often find that that's quite formulaic for the case managers. They're just ticking a box. They're not necessarily probing and asking more questions. And so it's not necessarily very informative. It's not necessarily getting a better idea of the needs of that individual or informing a strategy for how it should be managed. So again, it's not necessarily picking up if it's one that you really need to closely watch or not. You often send things off for various reports. You get various assessment reports. The biggest problem we've seen is that they're not integrated into one whole. And also, they're kept siloed from each other. So you get a medical opinion, but the medical specialist who's being asked for the opinion doesn't have the benefit of the functional assessment results, so it just seems counterintuitive. So instead of building on knowledge, and each time you get another assessment report, it's holistic, you just get more and more fragmented information until you've got information overload and you actually don't really know what you do know about that case anymore, and it would take too long to read it all through to figure it out. So we see reports being commissioned for no particular reason. The system's another thing to call out, because although there are some very sophisticated case management systems, some of them are really clunky, some of them don't encourage strategic thinking at all. There's all different screens that have to be filled in. They're very process-based and they don't help you integrate. They don't give you a chronology of where the person is up to. So when the phone rings, you don't have a screen that you can call up that reminds you where exactly this person is up to. You have to scroll through file notes, and another problem is that all the information is in the file notes, therefore key information is not really being captured in your data set, therefore you're not learning from successes as well as failures. So systems are great, but we see many areas where they could be improved, and we see many claims management operations struggling with multiple systems, legacy systems. Some of it's in one place, some of it's in another. You look back at previous claims, you can't get them because they're on the old system, so really messy. It doesn't help in being a strategic case manager if you're dealing with a system like that. So moving on to the next section, thinking about information. So a key part of claims management is monitoring, and I think I've touched on this earlier. Are you actually getting the information that you need? Are you providing the people that you're asking to give you information with the information that you've got? What we forget is, as the claims manager, you've got information from all sorts of sources which would be very useful to the people who are trying to working face-to-face with the claimant, and yet we very rarely see a comprehensive brief provided to a medical specialist or to a rehabilitation provider, giving them all the information that you have about the claim. And as the claim goes on, that's critical, because you're being faced with decision points, the provider's being faced with decision points, and so is the employer, and yet you're not bringing to the table all the information that could help in making that decision. So I think case managers sometimes forget their role. I see their role as coordinating and facilitating. It's no point in having a wonderful pile of information on your file and it not going anywhere except in your mind. So I think that coordination and facilitation role really needs to be reinforced. which brings us straight to the next point, building that relationship with key players. So it takes time, and it's not critical in simple, straightforward cases, but it's absolutely critical in those complex and difficult cases. There's a need, and this is, I guess, what the previous speakers were talking about. There's such a need for a trusting and collaborative relationship. And again, this comes down to what is a claims officer or case manager's role. Their role is to contribute and to actually help with problem solving, to help identify issues, to question and probe, and to bring information to the table. So this is an area which we see it really does fall down, and I think it really falls down often because people just don't have the time to be proactive in that way, which I guess brings us back to segmentation and making sure that the difficult cases are given to a team that does have the time to really get involved. Oh, we also see, I guess you'd be aware, requests for difficult cases that have gone on and on. It's almost like, oh, we just don't know what to do. What should we do? Well, we'll get another IME. So you see all these IMEs, and they haven't been asked a particular question. They haven't been told, we're on the horns of this dilemma. Is there any point in us doing more of this? Do you really believe if we keep pushing in this direction we'll get somewhere? Or should we switch completely to a different goal? Do you ever see an IME ask those questions? Very rarely. And yet, that's the decision faced by the provider and the case manager. But you're not I keep hitting that, not asking the right question. So it comes down to confidence again, I think, that you need to really feel confident to have a peer-to-peer discussion and support and assist problem solving in difficult cases. That's where you should be. Okay, now we're moving on to the key, decision making, which is really, I guess, that decision, do I intervene? And if I do, what can I do? So I'm calling out the problems that we see here, I guess. Instead of strategic decision making, you'll sometimes see the fourth extension of a rehab plan, just approve it. I've actually spoken to case managers and gone, why did you approve this? It's the same as the last one. Nothing's changed, and so there's been no progress for the last 2 rehab plans. And they're like, well, I wouldn't think I could challenge a rehab provider. And I've had to say, so who's driving this bus? The rehab provider driving the bus. You're driving the bus. You're actually paying the bills. You could say, I'm not paying for that. Or you could say, if you want me to pay for that, you're going to have to give me a whole lot more justification. And you're going to have to show me that you're going to do something different because what you're doing before didn't work. They're like, oh, I couldn't do that. Yes, you could. That's what you should do. And the complicated claims should be with the team that's prepared to do it. And providers usually don't mind. They actually thank you for it. They go, oh, yes, I'm not sure we're going to make progress either. Well, let's try and figure out what can be done. So you don't want providers feeling that they give you little routine progress reports that sugarcoat and make everything sound pretty and are really process-based and tell you how many times they phoned the claimant. That's not what you need to know. You actually need to know if it's really difficult and we're not getting anywhere and I'm at my wit's end, that's what I want you to be able to tell me. So that doesn't mean the provider's bad. Some cases are difficult. So that trusting relationship where they will ring you and tell you the truth because they think that you might be able to contribute. You've got to get there on the difficult cases. How can we work together to develop strategies? And I think it's just what the previous speakers were speaking about, that collaborative relationship, and that should be, the insurers should be right in that space, offering expertise. So, oh, have I just done that one? I think I have. I'm sorry, I can't tell which way I'm going. No, okay, provider management. I guess this is a bit what I was just speaking about before, but we see it as an organisation sometimes. The provider management framework at even quite big insurance and claims operations is really 18th century. It's not data-driven. There's not an exchange of feedback. They're not providing feedback to the providers, nor are they asking the providers to provide feedback to them on how this collaborative relationship is working. So they're not capturing data that enables them to say these providers are doing well. It's all very process-based and it's all very numeric, when in fact what you really need to do is evaluate them in a qualitative sense. I have very rarely seen that case managers get required to fill in a comprehensive feedback. Maybe it goes to the provider, but maybe it's for the internal organisation on the quality of the rehab provider's work. And that should be done on every case so that you can build an understanding of what's working. Not necessarily to give anyone the sack, but to continuously improve and improve the quality and the cost effectiveness of the provider services, which is such a huge spend for insurers. So now, the final quadrant is, of course, the main one. All of this hard work won't be done if teams are not appropriately supported, if teams are not, if that complex role of a case manager is not recognised from the top, and the time and tools and assistance is not provided to facilitate strategic case management. So across different teams you get very different attitudes, you get different, for example, there might be embedded experts or there might be a panel that case managers can use to consult on difficult issues, but we see across different teams different attitudes to whether they do that. Some teams do that all the time, some teams never do it. Some teams did it once and hated it, so they didn't do it again. So if you've got a panel there, it may not be embedded. I think you need to really look at how the expertise that you've got in the claims department is being used, and is it being used in the right way? Are caseloads actually reasonable? If you've classified claims appropriately and looked at their complexity, then you need to look at caseload by complexity to see if it's reasonable. And is there a real commitment to training and mentoring and peer review and collaborative problem solving within the department? And sometimes in smaller operations a very limited career path, which means that eventually the good people go and there's too much turnover for you to build a bedrock of competence in the place. So, difficult challenge. Finally, almost finally, data and analytics is a key, and we do see actually that claims operations are often not very good at capturing good metrics on what they do. Again, it's not just quantitative, it's qualitative as well. So they need to evaluate the nature of their work as well as just outcomes, durations and costs. It's actually about the quality of the work. And so feedback surveys and peer review and a genuine commitment to understanding what works and what didn't go so well and continuous learning is really important. And that's an atmosphere that doesn't often exist, I think, in claims departments that we've seen. They're a bit frantic, they're often quite young, they're often under pressure, they're not well supported. Some of them really are struggling with caseloads and with the emotional content of the work that they're doing. And the value of what they're doing is not recognised by the leadership of the organisation, it's undervalued. And so that's kind of a horrible place. That's not conducive to effective working and to continuous improvement. Claims departments need to be involved in the data discussion. They need to have access to data. They need to be able to identify outliers and know where to focus, and they need to use data and contribute to data and understand why it's important so that they learn from their successes. In what way does the claims department that you're familiar with capture the characteristics of successful cases so that you can use that for future learning? Probably don't do it. Probably don't do it really. You can point to them and go, this was successful and low cost, but what was it about that case? Was it just that it was a great claimant or a really good employer, or was it something in case management that made it better? So failing to learn from experience seems to be a real shame. And I work for Finity, who are actuaries and data analysts, and very often they'll go in and their main mission is to tell an insurer what their data is telling them. So they've got masses of data, but they're not interrogating in a way that informs, continuous improvement. So they don't invest enough in data and analytics very often. So where are we at? We're nearly there. Culture and philosophy. This is about empowerment, it's about leadership, it's about genuine commitment to all the things we just spoke about, so that this career in claims management becomes something that's rewarding, valued, further developing, there's a pathway, and there's appreciation to the contribution you've made. It's the opposite of what we see, which is cynicism, learning by anecdote, because there's no actual data available and there's no information sharing. So people forming a view about things based on what they reckon, and sometimes that can be good, but often it's not. If there's no clear philosophy or values, if there's no clearly articulated claims management model under which you operate, then there's going to be a huge diversity of attitudes there. So I think it comes from that very strong statement at the top about what are we here for and how are we achieving it and how are we achieving it better and better. So with very little time left, I believe those are the areas of claims management operations that we feel should be focused on to maximise better outcomes. So it leads to a checklist, and I suppose this is pretty quick. What should triage and segmentation actually be achieving? I'm not going to read out every word, but it's there. How can initial assessment and planning be much more strategic and much more useful and inform you in a better way as to how to set milestones and how to understand what additional information you need, and in fact how to form a strategy on a particular case? How can the system be improved to facilitate the type of case management that we're talking about? How can we get better at obtaining and providing information? How can we make much more informed decisions by doing really effective monitoring of progress and asking the right questions to the right people, building those trusted relationships in order to make the right decisions? And the decisions are sometimes just whether to intervene or not, or the decision might be we need more information before we can decide if this is a realistic goal or not. But without that trusted partnership, the question won't be asked. Finally, I think this is the key. Second, finally, we talked about provider management. Team structure is really important, and I think really big teams are probably not conducive to good collaborative work. Smaller teams are better. Embedded expertise seems to be better in actually continuous learning and a willingness to share, good as well as bad experiences in a smaller environment. But the data-driven strategy, philosophy and culture, I think I call that as the main thing. So we really see that it comes from the top. And this is always the case, isn't it? If you've got strong leadership and a clear model and a true commitment to making that work, that flows down. If the team are highly valued and facilitated and they contribute to data which feeds back into strategy, then you've got the perfect loop of continuous improvement. So that's all I had to say. But I'd be very interested to hear if any of you recognise some of those scenarios. Just thinking too, if some of you are from a claims operation, how do you think you would go on that checklist of 10 items? Do you think they'd all be squeaky? Does anyone want to say an area where they went, oh my God, yes, that is the biggest problem in our place? You can do it anonymously. Any other comments about that? Does it sound familiar? Silent. Oh well, silence might be good.
I just was wondering, I was liking what you were talking about, the emphasis on team and structure and support. I was just wondering from all of the work you've done at Unity about your experience of inexperienced claims managers. As we all know, it's hard to recruit experienced workers' comp people, and I guess I'm keen to hear positive stories about inexperienced teams and how they've overcome that challenge.
Yeah, and I think I just mentioned it very briefly, but where there's really a strong commitment to mentoring and also collaborative problem solving, that's just such a wonderful learning environment. And so also I think in segmentation, it's a mistake to put the inexperienced staff only ever dealing with perfectly straightforward cases, because then they're not going to learn. So this is why I think small teams work better, because if they have the opportunity to join in discussions, case discussions and case conferences, and without taking time out from your daily work, they're shadowing someone else as well as dealing with the more straightforward matters. It's brilliant. A real commitment to mentoring, I think, is the main thing. Yeah. And, you can really be helped by decision tools, and some of you have got some of these duration predictors and things that help you. They help give you confidence. So if you think something's not tracking well, but you've got some reference material, then that also allows you might not have an enormous amount of knowledge about different injury types, but you've got some reference material that's going to help you. So, yeah, because it is a problem. Recruiting good staff and holding on to them is a problem, and so you really need to have everything in place to maximise their learning and to keep them. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or feedback? I have a question around the outliers.
Mm.
Have you seen anywhere where analysis of the outliers results in a significant change in the way the business operates or the claims process operates? And what are some best practice type examples?
Yes, I think outlier reports are really important, and there's, depends how good your metrics are, that you could get quite granular. And if all it does is pull out these cases and prioritise them for review, in really big operations, we were asked to do a review of long duration claims with a big insurer, and some of those claims had been inactive for like 6-9 months. So they weren't coming up on any report. So whether it was a due dates report or whether it's just like how long have they been on income payments, or this is the 5th session of 10 sessions of psychology, there's lots of different flags that could make you go, so that's a reason to get involved and see if this is working. Revisit the strategy. Yes, I have seen it done well. Mm.
I have a question. You mentioned clunky claims management or case management systems. Is there a particular system that you would recommend? Where in the process of looking for a new one?
Look, I'm not a techie, and I think there are new things coming out that I wouldn't have seen. I certainly haven't done a survey, but we've seen Guidewire used a lot, and we've seen it used well, and we've seen it used badly. So as they get more and more fabulous, these systems become more and more complex. We've seen insurers that are using Guidewire, but there's some really useful features that would help you build strategy, and they go, oh, we don't use that bit. And it's like, well, it's the best bit. This would help you pull information together. And they go, oh, it's just duplicating. No, it's facilitating. So I think it's not only the system you use, but also the way that you use it, and ensure that it's used consistently. The other thing we've seen is that the data that comes out of these systems is unreliable. What's an example? You'll shudder. I certainly won't tell you where it was. Estimated return to work date. So I've gone, well, that's good. Let's have a look at estimated return to work date. My God, it's insane. Everyone's expected to be off work for 5 months. Everyone. What's going on? Well, the practice is they don't want to put down what they mean, because then the system flags them to do something. And they don't want the system to flag them to do something. So they put, December. So the data is completely wrong. So, practice as well as the system. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Sue.
you.